Today, we're digging into the story of Yuan Shao. I mean, this was a man who seemed born to rule, who built the largest army in China and looked absolutely destined to become emperor. But then, in one of history's most stunning reversals, he lost everything. This is the story of a giant, a colossus with feet of clay.
So that brings up the big question, right? How on earth does a man with every single advantage, we're talking prestige, insane wealth, and an overwhelming army, suffer defeat so complete that it literally erases his family from the history books? Let's get into it.
And the gap between what he had and what happened, it's just staggering. He came from the most powerful family in the entire Han Dynasty, yet that family was wiped out. He commanded the largest army, only to see it completely shattered. He controlled huge, wealthy territories. But his legacy? It's one of total failure. This isn't just a loss, it's a genuine paradox. To really understand the fall, you've got to appreciate the rise. So first, let's take a look at how Yuan Shao built this incredible reputation and became the undisputed master of northern China. I mean, Yuan Shao's starting families were almost unfair. His family, the Yuans, had held the highest government jobs for 4 straight generations. That gave him what we'd call social capital, unmatched wealth, prestige, and connections. But he didn't just sit back and relax. No, he actively built a reputation for himself as this brave, charismatic guy who protected scholars when they got in trouble. And get this last point because it's brilliant. He was a master of PR. He spent 6 whole years in public mourning for his parents. This was incredible political theater that basically cemented his image as the most virtuous leader of his time. And he absolutely put that reputation to work. In 189, he takes this bold, decisive step and just massacres the corrupt court eunuchs. A year later, his prestige is so high that he's elected leader of this massive coalition against the tyrant Dong Zhuo. Then, in a slick political move, he actually tricks a governor into just handing over a huge, wealthy province. By 199, after a long, brutal war, he'd crushed his northern rival Gongsun and was the absolute master of the north. Seriously, he looked completely unstoppable.
But here's the thing. Even as he was winning all these victories, the fatal flaws in his character were starting to show. This is where the cracks in the Colossus begin to appear, and they would eventually undermine everything he had built. And this was his single biggest strategic mistake. In 106, the young emperor is basically a starving refugee. Yuan Shao's advisors are begging him, welcome the emperor, rule in his name. But Yuan Shao, he hesitates. He's afraid it would limit his own personal freedom. His rival, Cao Cao, saw the opportunity in a flash. You see, Yuan Shao saw the emperor as a burden. Cao Cao saw him as a weapon. And with that one moment of indecision, Yuan Shao handed Cao Cao the moral high ground and basically turned himself from a defender of the dynasty into a rebel.
This whole mess really highlights his most crippling flaw. He was a terrible judge of character. Just look at the choices he had. He had brilliant strategists like Tian Feng and Shou giving him perfect, cautious advice. He ignored them. Instead, he listened to sycophants like Guo Tu and Peng Ji, who just told him what his massive ego wanted to hear. He consistently punished the truth and rewarded flattery. His weaknesses were so glaringly obvious that his enemies had him totally figured out. This quote here, it's from Guo Jia, the top advisor to his rival Cao Cao, and it is a stunningly accurate psychological profile. Hesitant, indecisive, lazy discipline, an army without unity. Cao Cao knew exactly who he was fighting because Yuan Shao's flaws were on full display for everyone, except, it seems, himself. Okay, so now we get to see how all these flaws, the indecision, the bad judgment, the arrogance, all come together at the climax of his story, one of the most famous and catastrophic battles in all of Chinese history. So, welcome to the Battle of Guandu, and just look at this mismatch. Yuan Shao marches south with an elite army of over 100,000 men. Cao Cao meets him with maybe 20,000. On paper, this shouldn't even be a fight. It should be an absolute annihilation. But it turned into a masterclass in self-destruction. First, he refused wise counsel, actually jailing his best strategist for advising against a full frontal assault. Second, he let the drama and infighting in his own camp get so bad that one of his advisors, Shou, literally defects to the enemy. Third, and this is the killer, Shou tells Cao Cao exactly where Yuan Shao's main, poorly defended supply depot is. And fourth, Cao Cao leads this desperate raid, burns the supplies to the ground, and the morale of Yuan Shaw's huge army just evaporates. It completely collapsed, leading to a total rout. But the story gets even uglier. As his broken army is retreating, Yuan Shao, just consumed by shame and rage, orders the execution of Tian Feng, the very advisor who predicted this exact disaster would happen. His pride was so fragile that he would rather kill the man who tried to save him than admit that he was wrong. This defeat absolutely broke him, both physically and mentally. But his final act would make sure that his legacy wasn't just one of defeat, but of complete and utter self-destruction. So, 2 years after his defeat, Yuan Shao dies. But in his final, catastrophic error, he fails to formally name an heir, basically pitting his sons against each other. The second he died, they plunged the entire north into a vicious civil war, destroying the family's power from the inside. This was the greatest gift he could have possibly given his enemy. All Cao Cao had to do was wait, let the brothers destroy each other, and then pick them off one by one. Yuan Shao spent his life building the most powerful faction in China, and with his dying breath, he personally lit the fuse that blew the whole thing up. When you really look at his story, it fits a classic archetype perfectly, the tragic hero. He was a great man, born with every advantage you can imagine, who was destined for a catastrophic fall, all because of the fatal flaws baked into his own character. In the end, Yuan Shao's story is way more than just a military defeat. It's a timeless lesson on leadership, on ego, and on the hard truth that no amount of power can ever save you from yourself. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. What other giants from history collapsed under the weight of their own flaws?